What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And this week, while we are patrolling the Pioneer meta and trying to go through some of the top tier decks in the format, of course, before we get into anything super crazy, there's kind of a newcomer to the format, and it's a deck that's obviously been around for a while, but has seen very minimal success, and is actually currently overtaken the Is It Phoenix deck as the second most played deck in the format according to MTG Goldfish. So today we're going to take a look at Azorious Control and kind of break down exactly what is going on in this deck. So before we get too deep into that, of course, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos like this, you want to see other modern content and other longer form videos, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. And if you go into the description down below, you'll find a link to the deck list there, as well as a link to my Discord server if you want to go over there and join as well. Lastly, of course, the Casual Spikes podcast is going to be coming out one episode a week on Saturdays is kind of the plan right now. So if you are interested in that, of course, also subscribe to the channel and, go support that show and everything. And, if we can get enough support on it, I'm going to try to make it its own separate channel to kind of archive it from this one. But, that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about Azorious Control. And Azorious Control, while probably the least sexiest deck to play in terms of, what it's doing isn't super fancy. It's not, crazy by any stretch of the imagination. We're playing like a traditional control deck where we're playing very few actual win conditions in the deck. Granted, in past of Azorious Control, you played a lot less win conditions. But the fact that this deck is playing Yorion as a companion, and yes, Yorion is legal in Pioneer, but Lurrus is banned, I believe, in Pioneer. Yorion makes it so you can play with 20 extra cards in your deck to obviously meet the condition of playing it. So it's like you have a win condition kind of on standby. There's not really any other, flickering Omen of the Seas and temporary lockdowns and things like that. Even resetting some of your planeswalkers can be pretty interesting, but usually Yorion's there, I believe, is kind of for that minimal benefit. Plus, you just have access to a win condition at any point of the game. If you for some reason can't get Teferi Hero Dominaria going, or can stick a Wandering Emperor, Shark Typhoon, etc. So, what we're looking for in Blue-Eye Control is kind of what every control deck is kind of look for. You're looking to kind of weather the storm in the early turns, kind of get to the mid game where you're kind of able to leverage some of these other cards to get X for ones on your opponent. Stuff like Spring Verdict and Farewells, things like that, where your opponent gets a board full of creatures and you're just able to sweep them away with one spell and kind of put your opponent on the back foot and put them in top deck mode while you slowly start to take over the middle and late game with Teferi Hero Dominaria as a potential win condition, even though you're not technically going to win the game with this until much, much, much later than something like a Shark Typhoon or even a Wandering Emperor. Teferi Hero Dominaria is basically the embodiment of Blue-White Control. Getting +1 draw card, untapping 2 lands, so you're able to kind of play other spells proactively. You're able to play main phase Omen of the Sea, Scry, and then draw whatever, and then draw with Teferi Hero Dominaria, untap those lands. You're able to leave up interaction. Teferi usually gets the rep of a 5-mana Planeswalker that ends up actually being a 3-mana Planeswalker, because you kind of get that rebate back as long as you're able to resolve the Planeswalker. The Wandering Emperor plays, I think, a little bit better as a defensive Planeswalker that could truly be offensive rather than Teferi. Teferi is definitely the card advantage, deal with something if I absolutely need to, obviously, but that's not the big benefit of playing Teferi. And then, of course, the emblem that doesn't necessarily win you the game, but you pretty much win the game from that point. The Wandering Emperor, is a 4-mana for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker. It has flash, and when it enters the battlefield this turn, you may activate her loyalty abilities anytime you cast an instant. This is where your opponent's able to attack, and then you play a Wandering Emperor, before blocks, after blocks, whatever. At any point before damage is dealt, and then you're able to -2 to just exile an attacking creature and then gain 2 life. Of course, could be their biggest threat. Also, just getting to make 2/2s ends up like pumping those 2/2s. Opponent attacks 1/1, you can just make it 2/2, and then, you know, from there, be able to put like +1/+1 counters on it. It's going to be able to attack, it's going to get first strike, things like that. You know, it is definitely a Planeswalker that you are willing to play multiple copies of, because it is going to remove multiple creatures, and it's even going to put creatures into play. Even just like the typical line of just flashing this in, exiling your opponent's biggest threat, and then making a 2/2, and it leaves, is totally fine, and it makes it very good in the fact that you can kind of like block the next thing, or even kind of like set up, you know, another Wandering Emperor to give the creature a counter, and then maybe when in combat with, you know, against something else that has like 3 toughness. Set up how Control wants to play it, where its cards are very flexible. And the Wandering Emperor, while obviously with like a lot of Planeswalkers, their abilities are their abilities. It just kind of like comes up in the context of the situation. And Wandering Emperor definitely has some interesting like sequencing effects, just from the fact that she can activate her loyalty abilities anytime you can cast an instant the turn that she comes into play. So just some things to keep in mind if you choose to pick up Blue-White Control. We go down further into like the spells. You know, of course, we have the usual kind of suspects of what we would see in a control deck. You know, we have Censor is just like a good tempo play, you know, where your opponent tries to go play their 2-drop, you just censor it. And of course, if it's not going to be any good, your opponent's playing around Censor or what have you, you can just cycle it, cash it in for another card. Pretty good when you are playing, you know, 36 lands plus a double face card in Jawari Disruption, and just kind of get like some card advantage going, so you can get rid of these bad cards and actually try to get some good cards. We have Changed the Equation, which came out of March of Machines, which is like another 2-mana counterspell that you can just kind of counter something on turn 2 for your opponent. But then you can also counter target red or green spell with converted mana value, or with mana value 6 or less, excuse me. You know, so you can hunt bigger game with this. You know, like some of the mono green decks that might be floating around, like Change the Equation can get them pretty good. But aside from that, like Change the Equation, also getting things with mana value 2 or less just as a blanket is pretty nice as well, considering that we have cards like Thoughtseize from like Rakdos, you have like Bloodtithe Harvesters, you technically have like the Stomp half of the Giant. You can go and counter that, and then they don't get the Adventure. Just a few things from like some of the most played decks that Change the Equation is pretty annoying to just like counter those things. And then, you know, red and green, you know, there's some big red spells in the format too, and of course green spells. There's big things in the format, and Change the Equation just kind of like catches those while not overly committing to it by playing 4 copies, only having to play with 2. You have Dovin's Veto as just an uncounterable negate. You know, you're playing 2 colors, you're playing 36 lands. I would imagine you have a very hard time not having blue and white on turn 2 onward to just not play an uncounterable negate versus just playing actual negate. Get Lost, you can, for 2 mana, destroy target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker, and its controller creates 2 map tokens. It's in a deck that ends up playing a decent amount of removal, you know, where we see cards like Spring Verdict, you see Farewell. You know, you have other copies of Get Lost and things like that. Even like not Make Disappear, not Quick Step. Wow, huh? Oh yeah, this is instant speed divination. That's pretty cool. You have some options on getting rid of things. So if your opponent just cracks map tokens and then, you know, gets some kind of card advantage that way from Get Lost, you can kind of negate it with, you know, some of the other removal that is in the deck, plus, you know, like your planeswalkers and stuff. Like, you're going to be able to leverage the removal of like the creature, planeswalker, enchantment a lot better than your opponent's going to be able to leverage 2 map tokens. And of course, having to have another creature to be able to explore with. You have Hollowed Moonlight, which if a creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, you exile it instead, and then you get to draw a card with Hollowed Moonlight. This card has, you know, a little bit of upside. I mean, a lot of upside against the, you know, Phoenix decks, where they are forced to bring their Phoenixes back if they cast like 3 or more instant sorcery spells before combat. You're able to just play this, draw a card, you're going to get rid of their threats, and you're going to be up so much tempo that, you know, it's going to be very hard for them to try and win the game. This also just doesn't mean that Phoenix is looking to kind of like free roll and just absolutely load up its graveyard and then, you know, come out super hot and, you know, be able to play kind of under the control deck. This is kind of a way that you're able to fix your deck a little bit. You're able to draw some other spells if Hollowed Moonlight is not necessarily good in the matchup. And then on top of that, too, in the matchups where it is good, it's just going to absolutely wreck your opponent, and it's going to replace itself. So very nice there. Azorious Disruption, essentially like another sensor, but this is a land. This lets you kind of keep some other, like maybe like 1 or 2 land hands. Like this ends up being like a third, and of course with like Omens of the Sea, and even like like the Singleton Quick Study, and all these other cards that end up like drawing cards. You know, you can kind of get away with playing, 37 lands in your control deck, because you're going to be able to kind of hit your land drops through most of the early turns of the game. You have Make Disappear. It's like another 2-mana counterspell, unless your opponent pays 2 mana instead of 1, which we see from like Censor and from Azorious Disruption. Also, there's like an added benefit. I mean, you have a Castle Ardenvale in your deck. You can make like 1 toughness or like 1 power creatures, and just end up making Make Disappear cost 4 mana to be, of course we have like Wandering Emperor as well. Of course, like that's like it's going to be good enough as like a 2-mana like counter spell unless our opponent pays 2, with a little bit of upside as well, instead of playing something, like I believe there's like a Kaladesh card like Quench and stuff like that, where it makes your opponent pay 2. This has like the added upside of like you can make your opponent pay 4. It's countered. We have Quick Study, Instant Speed Divination. You have Memory Deluge, which is kind of like the draw spell of choice for decks like this. You can pay 4 mana, you look at the top X cards library, X amount of mana spent to cast the spell, put 2 of them in your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So the first time you play it, you get to look at 4 cards, pick 2, and then you flash it back for 7 mana. You end up getting to pick 2 cards from 7 cards, which, is reminiscent of something like a Dig Through Time, which is what this card got compared to a lot when it was, spoiled in the Midnight Hunt set. It's a very good draw spell. It's very powerful. That's kind of the opposite of what control decks do, because really, like, their top end's really powerful, but then like everything else is just kind of like, annoying, mildly annoying to deal with. But Memory Deluge definitely fits the role of being a draw spell, very well, and just gets to sit in the graveyard until you can get to a point where you can just flash it back for 7 mana, and then it's kind of backbreaking at that point for your opponent, because looking at 7 cards, getting to pick the 2 best cards from those cards is pretty hard for anybody to beat, and especially when you get to that late game, control just kind of takes over and starts to like figure out a way that it can kind of win the game. So it keeps that door as closed as possible, if not completely shut, from you actually being able to win the game. 1 Rewind, counter-target spell, untap 4 lands. Of course, you only get to untap the lands if the Rewind actually resolves, so you're kind of able to, essentially have a free counter spell. You counter their thing, okay, and you get to untap, and, leave up something like a Make Disappear, maybe a Hallowed Moonlight, get lost, etc. Supreme Verdict, Farewell, your Wraths of choice. Farewell having the added benefit of getting to exile artifacts, enchantments, and graveyards as well, and you get to choose as many modes as applicable. Of course, like the graveyard, like even though we're playing like 4 Memory Deluge, like usually there's going to be a decent amount of time where like exiling all graveyards is going to be beneficial to you, even if you have like 1 or 2 Deluge in like your graveyard. Always feels bad, but at the end of the day, if it means that you're not losing the game and you're still able to kind of like keep a few spells in hand to maybe clean up anything else that could be coming by, it's going to end up working out in your favor. Omen of the Sea, which is essentially a scry 2, then draw a card at instant speed, and then you can pay 3 mana and sacrifice it to scry 2. Temporary Lockdown. When it enters the battlefield, exile each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until Temporary Lockdown leaves the battlefield. You can kind of like sweep up some like the smaller creatures and annoying permanents your opponent plays, and then like the added benefit of like just having access to Yorion at any time, you can then have it re-enter the battlefield and kind of like re-establish the Temporary Lockdown. Of course, like they'll get everything back, but then you just end up exiling all other things. Like Blood Tithe Harvester and things, like a card that you think would kind of benefit from being exiled and coming back, but then like their blood tokens as well kind of end up getting swept away in the Temporary Lockdown. So just a very good piece of interaction, for those early turns. 3 Shark Typhoon, you can pay 2 mana and then X and cycle it, and you just create a shark, and then that could be like your win condition. You also just have playing the Shark Typhoon itself, and then playing like these counter spells, playing these Memory Deluges and what have you, and then just getting to make like 2 power, 4 power, 5 power, whatever sharks, and then just end up beating your opponent down that way. Mana base, you have Deserted Beach, you have Field. You're playing 4 Field of Ruin and 4 Demolition Field, which are just 8 lands that tap for colorless mana in this deck, which is absolutely insane. You have 4 Sunken Citadel. You choose a color, and then you can add 2 mana of the chosen color. You can only spend this mana to activate abilities of land sources, so you can kind of like double dip a little bit, and you can like Field of Ruin something, and then Demolition Field for 1 mana, and like in a way kind of get like that mana back from something like a Field of Ruin. You have Restless Anchorage, which is a creature land that taps for a blue and white, meaning you pay 3, and it becomes a 2/3 blue bird creature, white and blue bird creature that is still a land, and when it attacks, you create a map token, which you can, explore onto the Restless Anchorage. You can end up like getting past some lands, or hitting some spells and kind of setting yourself up, for a pretty good draw step in the late game. 4 island, 4 plains, super easy. 3 Hengegate pathway is the blue-white pathway that doesn't want to show up on my screen. Hallowed Fountain, the blue-white blue-white shockland, Castle Ardenvale that we had mentioned earlier. Notably, not playing the blue castle, which I think is interesting because I thought, at least in like these blue-white control decks, Castle Ardenvale and then the blue castle, which the name escapes me, usually kind of go hand in hand, and I think this deck in particular is just eschewing that for Field of Ruin and for Demolition Field. Go to the sideboard, Narset's Reversal, Rest in Peace, a Chrome Host Seed Shark, which in a way is kind of like the Shark Typhoon, just it makes the like 0/0 incubator tokens, and then you have to pay 2 mana to transform them, and then they'll become 2/2s or 4/4, whatever the CMC is of the card that you cast. You have Mystical Dispute, you have Narset, Parter of Veils, you have Regal Caracal, which is a card that we have not seen in a long time. A 5-mana 3/3 that makes 2 1/1 cats and gives other cats you control +1/+1 have lifelink. Can be pretty good in like aggressive matchups, and of course too, like this is just like 5 mana, put 7 power into play, and you can reasonably protect it as well. So just a pretty decent finisher, honestly. I mean, of course, like makes racing pretty hard too when your cats have lifelink. And one more Farewell on the sideboard, and that is the Azorious control deck for the Pioneer format. While it's not fun because obviously their cards kind of like there's no necessarily like hidden synergies, or like the synergies of like the cards in the Azorious control deck kind of just go to the surface, and like maybe you scratch it a little bit and like you get to the bottom. Of course, like Shark Typhoon with like all these other like counter spells and stuff, like you're tempoing your opponent, you're kind of stopping them from casting any relevant spells that could potentially win the game, while you're also putting win conditions on the battlefield and like 2/2 flyers, 3/2 flyers, etc. But it is very effective. Obviously the second most played deck in the format currently as of the recording of this video, and it's not hard to see why when a lot of like what the format is trying to do, it's able to kind of tool and zero in on those things. I think control typically, like when the metagame is like wide open and very diversified, I think control has a pretty hard time compensating. I think you have to be a really good control player to do very well like with control in a wide open metagame. And I think even though we're at the point now where, there's like probably reasonably 4-5 decks, including blue-white control, that you could be playing in Pioneer that have a decent share of the metagame, we're still looking at, almost a third of the format being Rakdos, midrange, or blue-red Phoenix. So, I mean, control is definitely a viable option. I think you can kind of get away with being a little bit less of like a, probably like a decent control player in kind of like constricted metas, for the fact that you kind of can build your deck around like beating those decks, and hopefully with like a little bit of other overlap for some of the other decks, in this case like Lotus Field and the Amelia combo deck. You can have a pretty good matchup, or at least feel pretty good in north of 50% of the total matchups that you face in a given Pioneer tournament. So yeah, that is blue-white control for the Pioneer format. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Ring the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. If you want to check out the deck list, I do have the deck list linked in the description down below, and also the Discord server that I run as well if you want to go over there and join. And of course, check out the Casual Spikes podcast on my channel, and with new episodes coming out every week talking about Modern Pioneer and some other stuff related to the format. So if that's something that interests you, subscribe, be notified when those things go up. that's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.